right, we were talking about the period of time that we call the prophets. There was how many books of prophecy in the Old Testament? Is that right?
17.
All right. All right. 17 books of prophecy. How many books of major prophets? 5. How many books of minor prophets? No. 12. All right. What's the difference between a minor and a major prophet? Length of the book, just what we call them. That's it. All right. Let's just back this time of the United Kingdom all the way back over here and get it behind us. That's the 3 kings of the United Kingdom. You remember who they were? Saul, David, and Solomon. All right. Then the kingdom split. Here was Rehoboam down here, the son of Solomon. But one of Solomon's enemies came back from Egypt by the name of Jeroboam. And he carried off 10 tribes in rebellion or against the 2 other tribes. There's really, this is not 100% exact. The Levites scattered out and so on, but this is a way to know the difference. This kingdom was called what? Northern. And what else? Israel. This one was called what? Southern. It was called what else? This was called Israel. So what was this one called? Judah. All right. This one was wrong to start with. This one was. Those sheets I gave you showed you things that where they departed from God's teaching immediately. They started using people that were not from the tribe of Levi even. Things like that. Wrong place of worship and wrong times and so on. So they finally went into who captured them and what group of people? Their enemy. No, now that was the other one down here. Who got the northern? Assyrian. Map I gave you, see the Assyria there? Assyrian captivity. All right, and these kings continued on down here. Those sheets I gave you showing the kings of the north and then the kings of the south. The kings of the south continued on until they went into Babylonian captivity, and that was 70 years, and they returned. Groups of them did. I'll just put Babylonian captivity here, B-A-B. And we had just finished talking about the queen, or the woman that, in a sense, saved her people, or kept her people from destruction. What was her name? down here and during this period of time? Esther. All right. But then we were talking about some of the prophets. Some of the kings first. The good king was, what was his name? The one that was called the good king. Hezekiah. Hezekiah, I believe it is. Hezekiah. What king had 15 years added to his life? Hezekiah. All right, come in. So that's a couple of things that's memorable there that you should remember. Then we were talking about some prophets, and as has already been said, there's 17 books of prophecy in the Old Testament, 5 long ones and 12 short ones. We say 5 major and 12 minor. What are the 5 major? Isaiah 2, 3. What? Got your little cards with you? What now? Isaiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. It's easier to pick those out and kind of give you a start. And somebody said, well, it's back over here where these long books start. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Now, we were also talking about what was the man's name who was swallowed by the fish? Jonah. All right. We was talking about Jonah. And when the bell rang, we mentioned to you that God had instructed that man who was over in this area to go and preach to Nineveh, off over here. Now, this would be off up in part of what's Iraq now, I guess, in this area. And he didn't want to do it, so he went the other direction. This is the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. He headed out to the other end of the Mediterranean Sea. This is a bigger part of the Mediterranean Sea right there. Over into the area that would be known as Spain now, to a town that was, the Bible mentions is, what was the place where that ship was going? Tarshish. Tarshish or something like Tarshish. You can find it in the Bible. And he was escaping from God, evidently, escaping from his responsibility of what God had told him to do. But he didn't escape. A great storm came upon them in this sea here. That was called the Great Sea. Also, we call it the Mediterranean Sea. And those people on board said that man of God, in essence, that's the one we want to get rid of. He caused this. His God's angry with him or something along that line. You'd have to look that up to get the exact words. But they decided we'll just throw him overboard and get rid of our problems. They threw him overboard, and God had prepared a great fish. Some translations use the word whale, but the more accurate, I believe, would be a great fish. We don't know exactly what kind of a fish it was, a great fish. This fish swallowed Jonah, and he stayed in the belly of that fish for 3 days. Everybody believes that, don't you? All right. It's in the Bible. The reason I say that is there's an old joke that went around. A fellow was listening to another man talk about the Bible, and this person he was talking to never had heard of the Bible much. And the fellow told him about Jonah in the belly of the whale for 3 days, and Daniel in the lion's den, and he didn't get hurt, and the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace for a period of time, and they didn't even get burned at all. Not a hair on their head was singed. And the fellow said, "Now hold it. Now you just hold it there." He said, "That just couldn't be. In a fire hot, not 7 times hotter than normal, and they didn't even get singed." He says, "I don't believe that, and furthermore, I don't believe that fishtail you told me either." So some people look at the Bible in that way, but these are Bible facts, and these are special conditions. If God can make man and make the earth and all things therein, he can take care of things like that. So this man, Jonah, was kept alive, or he prayed from the belly of the whale, or from the belly of the big fish. And the big fish vomited him out on the land, all right, on the beach. And then he decided to do what God told him to do. He got up and went to Nineveh. Did you ever hear of Jonah's gourd? If you could have a garden that would grow as fast as Jonah's gourd, you would be in high cotton so far as gardening is concerned. Maybe even be as good as Karen in growing things. How fast did that thing grow? Pretty quick, didn't it? He needed a place to rest, so this gourd grew fast and made a place for him to be shaded. He preached to Nineveh, of course, and that's the whole tale of this man, Jonah. And it's a memorable thing. The only reason I relate it to you, it kind of places him in history along in here where the prophets were in Old Testament times. Now, since I've already mentioned a couple of other incidents that are memorable, I'm not, of course, giving you the messages that these prophets gave. That's a very valuable study. But if I give you high points and certain things that would stand out in your mind, you can place Bible teaching with these things that happened to them. Daniel, in the book of Daniel, and 3 friends, or 3 more Hebrew children, or Hebrew young men, were chosen by the Babylonian hierarchy. These young men look like they'd be fine young men. Maybe they even gave them IQ tests. I don't know. They like to do in the Army nowadays, in the Army and the Navy, decide who can go where. They looked at our tests when I was went in the Navy in 1944, and they said, "We've looked at the tests, and we've given all of you some code and a few things like that, and those who pick up on some of that thing, we want you to go get in the Naval Air Corps," and that sort of a thing. Maybe they did things like this. But these people were picked out as for special service. They were to be fed different from the other slaves, and they were to be taken care of and go in special service for the king over here in Babylonia. And their names again were, all right, Shadrach, I think that's a long A, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I was wanting their Hebrew names. Can you give me their Hebrew names? You gave me the Babylonian names of those 3, but you gave me the Hebrew name of Daniel. Isn't that rather odd that the Bible gives you the Hebrew name of Daniel, but the people remember the Babylonian name of the other three? Look in the first chapter of Daniel along in there, and find those names. There is Daniel, a Hebrew name, but what was his Babylonian name? Belteshazzar. All right, Belteshazzar. Remember him and separate him from another fellow who was king, or the successor of Nebuchadnezzar. So if you tell somebody you know anything about that book of prophecy by Belteshazzar, that'd be all right to ask that. That's the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel did what? He refused to follow the king's instructions. In essence, they didn't want him worshiping his God. He did it 3 times a day. He faced the east where the capital of, or faced back to where the capital of Judaism was, in Jerusalem, and prayed 3 times a day. They wanted that stopped. They wanted full allegiance to the king. That's the reason why they threw him in the den of lions, but God closed the mouths of the lions, and when they went back to see about him, he was there, and they wasn't bothering him at all. So they turned him loose. Now, his 3 friends were named, you've looked those up now, haven't you, back there? Mm-hmm. What were their names? Azariah. Now, one of them was Azariah. Mishael. All right. And Hananiah, isn't it? H-A-N-I-A-N-I? H-A-N-A-N-I-A. All right. Hananiah, Azariah, and the other one was Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, something like that. Now, those are the Hebrew names. The Hebrew names of those 3 children. We call them the 3 Hebrew children. Now, what did they do or not do? Somebody tell me. That's right. They also disobeyed that king's order and so on. So they were to be thrown into the fire that was 7 times hotter than normal, and the people that threw them in were consumed by fire, but not these 3. And they looked in there, and how many did they see in the fire? They saw 4. They put in 3, and they looked in and saw 4. Throughout the Old Testament, there is a personality that's found in many places called the angel of the Lord. That is thought by many, 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 many scholars to be Jesus Christ before he came to this earth as the Son of God on this earth. They saw 4. This angel of the Lord was in there. They were protected. They were protected by God, and they came out without being burned at all. There is a little known or little emphasized fact about these. And I've asked more than one preacher, and they all think the same. Because I say I ask preachers, but I know they study more than most of us. Were all 4 of these eunuchs? Evidently, it can be answered in the affirmative. These people were sent to the keeper of, the keeper of the eunuchs. When they separated these folks out to be special servants, evidently they were made eunuchs, so they were castrated. So that's a little emphasized fact, but because that statement is made, they were probably in that category. You certainly don't see any offspring from these at all, these prophets. are these special servants of God. So that's Daniel, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's memorable, or you should remember that. Now, another thing you should remember from the prophets is which one of the prophets is called the Messianic prophet? Isaiah, because there's so much prophecy in there concerning Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, of course, is the Messiah who is to come. Brother Chad, would you turn to Isaiah 53 and start reading, and be prepared to put your thumb somewhere when I say stop. Isaiah 53. All right, now I believe this prophecy is something like maybe 700 years before Christ. Go ahead. All right, stop right there. Realizing that Jesus Christ, or the Messiah, is who he's talking about, this is a person that has no comeliness. Some people say Jesus Christ must have been ugly. Well, they've got that to go by. I wouldn't deny it, and I wouldn't dwell on it. But just go ahead. He's talking about Jesus Christ.
When we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him.
All right.
He despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows.
He was despised and rejected of men. Is that right? Is that what it said? All right. Do you see Christ in that? They killed him. They despised him. Go ahead.
And acquainted with grief and we hid where our faces from him. He was our despised, and we esteemed him not.
All right. Go ahead reading a little further. You see, just keep in mind, Jesus Christ is who he's talking about. Hundreds of years ahead of the time when Christ came to earth.
Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed.
All right, you see, you can fit Christ into all of those. He was beaten with many stripes before he was crucified. He was wounded for us. And all those words there that describe why Christ died on the cross. Go ahead a little further.
All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all.
All right, let's stop right there. Christ died for the sins of others. The Lord God laid upon his Son the sins of all, because we've all gone astray. Go ahead.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth.
All right, let's stop there. Christ went before all these tribunals that night, 4 of them, and they continued to try to get him to testify or to defend himself. Most he would ever say is "thou sayest," and things like that. They spit on him, they beat him, they put a crown of thorns upon his head, and he let them do it. And this describes what's going to happen. You can read that chapter and just see what's going to happen at the crucifixion of Christ. Go ahead a little further.
He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people.
All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. Those passages there are so much quoted, and even songs. You can recognize songs that have words that come from there. He was despised and rejected, and so on. All right. So you remember that Isaiah is the prophet that's called the Messianic prophet. The Jews always expected a Messiah to come. See, they got themselves in all kinds of problems by not doing what God told them to do. But it seems that they always expected God to come back and miraculously help them out. So they remembered David. They respected him highly. When Christ came upon this earth and after he died, then Peter preached a sermon on the day of Pentecost, and he referred back to the man they respected greatly, David. But he told them that this is not David. He has not risen. David's tomb is with us, and we know where his bones are. But Christ's tomb was empty. He arose. So he was trying to convince them way up here that this was not the kind of Messiah they were looking for. They were looking for a Messiah, a Savior that would come back, sit on a throne, in a physical throne in Jerusalem, and rule in glory, kill all the enemies and things like that. But Christ brought forth what kind of a kingdom? A spiritual kingdom. He rules over that spiritual kingdom in heaven, not like David did on the earth. So that was a mystery to those folks, and it has been a mystery to a lot of people down through the ages. And even today, those people who want to make the Bible say that there is such a thing as a second coming with a rule upon this earth still want to cling on to something like that. It's a form of what the Jews were looking for. Looking for a man to come back. Now they say he'll come back and rule on a physical throne on this earth. The Bible does not say that. The Bible said you'll see him in the clouds as you saw him last. And then will come the end. The grave will give up their dead and so on. So it's important to connect all these things in the Bible and realize that you go forward and see how they really played out. Because man didn't understand what God's plan was. All right. This group up here now, the northern kingdom, went into Assyrian captivity. The Assyrians captured them, and they never returned as a complete governing group again. There were remnants left in what we, in Christ's time, call Samaria. They were half-breeds because a lot of the men had been killed, and there was a lot of cross-breeding, so to speak, and that's about the way they looked at it, so that there was half-breeds in Samaria at the time Christ was on the earth. The northern province, let's talk Christ's time again, the northern province when Christ was on the earth was Christ's family's home. That was Galilee. If you would look at this map and just figure this to be in 3 states or 3 provinces. They were called provinces. Romans call these areas provinces. Galilee, Christ came from Nazareth, or his family did. He wasn't born there because they had gone down into the area or the province of Judea to go back to their nativity, because this family came from down in here around Bethlehem. So some way or other their records showed that they should go back to where they belonged and be counted. That's why Christ and his family were down here during the time when Christ was born. But here's Galilee, Jews, undisputed in numbers, and down here was Jews. But here was some of what's left of the Assyrian captivity. We come back in here, and there was half-breeds in here. And I was mentioning to you before, I'll say it again, Jews, they had to go to Jerusalem, at least the men did, 3 times a year at least. And they didn't want to mix. God's bloodline was, his people's bloodline was supposed to be kept pure in the Old Testament, down to the birth of his son. And therefore, they didn't want to mix with others. Give you an example of this mixing. The devout Jews in this country today will just about throw out a member of the family if they marry someone else other than a Jew. When I was dating Iris in Nashville, she was working there for a while. I went 2 years to Lipscomb, and she went 1. And she was out in West End, had a job at one of those factories, and she was staying where a man and a woman had a room for rent. The man was a Jew, and the woman was a Gentile. She said they were nice people, but she didn't have to have too much contact with them other than just be around them some. And the man's mother and daddy would come over there and just, in effect, sit on one side of the room and not even act like they wanted to look at the woman. They so hated the fact that he had married that Gentile that they didn't want any connection with him. And there was always discussions, but this man was sort of hard-headed. He didn't care about living too closely to Jewish tradition. But now that's just in this century. There are still Jews that are a whole lot closer than that. There's a group in New York who even try to keep the Sabbath day or Saturday holy. And I didn't never know any Jews around Nashville or anywhere else that tried to keep the Sabbath day holy. You know, they're supposed to only walk about 3/4 or 7/8 of a mile on Saturday. Well, there's some in New York that try to do that. So that goes way back, goes back to Old Testament times. They were not supposed to mix. And Christ came along, and rather than go across and go down this way, he went right through that. And he talked to that woman at the well. Do you remember that? That was in Samaria. Talked to the woman at the well. And she thought it was strange. Why, you're from a different group of people. And he began telling her some things, and he said, I want some water and so on, but I can give you water from which you'll never thirst again. Of course, he was talking about the water of life and his coming system of salvation. And then he told her, said, you're right. You've had 5 husbands, or however the conversation went, and the one you got shouldn't be yours. In other words, he gave her a lesson in divorce and remarriage right there without spelling out anything. You shouldn't have her, or he shouldn't have you. But that was Christ's idea about coming through here. And then the story is told by Christ of the man who fell among thieves while going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And that's right here. It's a mountainous area in there. A lot of thieves and robbers, I understand, still in those areas. And you go along those roads at night, your car might be accosted or attacked. But this man was fell upon by robbers. They robbed him and beat him up and left him to die. And along came a priest and a Levite. Both of them were from the Levitical tribe. They were that was a special religious tribe. The tribe was supposed to take care of our religious affairs for the Jews. Yet both of them walked on the other side and just let him lay. Then along came, look here, one of these old half-breed Samaritans. They don't put it that way, but that's the story that Christ said. Along came a Samaritan, and he helped the fellow. He bound up his wounds, or he took care of his injuries, and took him to an inn and found a place for him to stay, and he left word that when I come back, I'll pay you anything else that's needed to take care of this man. Then Christ said, who's his neighbor? Who's your neighbor? The one that helped out. And he used something that the Jews hated. Christ was teaching some lessons there in race hatred, really, the Jews versus all other races. So that's something memorable about the background of Samaria goes all the way back to here. Now, we've got them out of the picture, the 10 tribes. The 2 tribes, then later on, and you got those sheets I showed you where the kings continued on. The Babylonians captured the remaining group of the Jews and carried them into captivity. Carried many of them over here to Babylon, made slaves out of them and so on, or tried to convert them. But they only stayed 70 years, and then they were allowed to go back. Nebuchadnezzar, some people say Nebuch had a razor, but Nebuchadnezzar was the king's name. And Nebuchadnezzar, a memorable thing about him was that he had defied God. He had corrupted God's plan for keeping his people. So something happened to him. What happened to this king? He went crazy, the way we'd put it nowadays. He lost his mind, and he went out and would eat grass like cows and so on. Long hair, fingernails, and so on. You picture him like that because he was wild. And then, in the end, though, he straightened himself out. He recognized that God is the God of all, and restored somewhat sanity and so on. Then there was a king named, close to Daniel's name. What was it? Belshazzar. Has that Chazzer? That's close enough for you to know it. You can look it up and see how it's spelled. Belshazzar. You remember that Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. This Belshazzar, he decided to throw a great big old drunken party for all of his, let's say his administration. You can think of it as kind of like Clinton today, calling in all of his bigwigs and say, let's have a big old party. All right. Because they had captured Jerusalem, and the symbol of Jewish religion, which meant so much to the Jews, they had captured the temple. They had ransacked that temple, taken gold out of it, and all the containers that were in there. All of that was made of valuable metal. So he says, send some servants and get us those containers that were taken out of the Jewish temple that they used in their worship services. Go get those, and we'll throw a drunken party and drink out of them and so on. While they were doing that, having that party, there came a hand writing on the wall. Mene, tekel, euphrasin, or something like that. Meaning you have been tried in the balances and found wanting. All right. And the Bible says his knees knocked. He was so afraid. And I guess mine would too. I saw a hand writing on the wall in a dark area while the party's going on. You've gone too far, man. And what happened to this man then? He died that night, didn't he? All right. I think when we were going over this last year, when Angela was in here, she said, yeah, you better not mess with God. That's exactly the way it was. You better not mess with God in certain circumstances in the Old Testament for certain. This man died because of that. All right, they stayed down there 70 years. They came back. Nehemiah was in the group that came back, and he undertook and did rebuild the temple because it had been pretty much destroyed, and rebuilt the walls around the city of Jerusalem so that they could carry on. They came back in a couple of groups you'll see in books and information we'll give you. They came back in more than one group. Then they continued on until there's a 400-year gap during which time there is not complete agreement as to whether or not there was any inspired Word of God. So that brings us up to the end of the New Testament period of history and God's treatment of His people back through that area. Now, during this 400 years, the Greek kingdom came into existence. The Greek Empire. You remember we have talked about the kingdoms in prophecy, that there would be the Medo-Persian kingdom. After that, the Babylonian kingdom, then the Medo-Persian kingdom, which followed, and after that, the Greek Empire, and after that, the Roman Empire, during which the Roman Empire, Christ, would appear upon the earth. So